Welcome to Morning Devotion with Ken Gurley. Devotions designed to inspire you on your daily walk with God. Here's your host, Ken Gurley.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Morning Devotion. Thanksgiving 2020, and you're here. I can't believe it. You're here, that you've got the time to join me at 7 a.m. this Thursday morning. Beverly, I saw you first. Dee, you were quick on the draw this morning. Hope, Gladys, Mary, Larice, Marla, thank you. Thanks each and every one of you for making this an incredibly special time. That's something I'm thankful for today, and that is each of you. Each of you during this difficult season, make the effort Monday through Friday in the wee hours of the morning. Well, really, it's 7 o'clock. But anyway, wee hours of the morning, you get here. We welcome you today. Hope and pray you're well. And hope today is as special as it can be. Here in the States, this is our annual Thanksgiving Day, set aside to thank God for all that He's done. And I thank God for each of you. During this difficult season, you show up, and not only show up, you gather. You let everyone know you're here. You give a thumbs up. You give a shout out. You open up your heart, your life, your schedule for this time together. So thank you. Thank you, Ted and Tony and Shirley and Michelle, Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you. It makes my heart warm to see each of you, and it makes life a little more doable in this season. Maybe you're on the road. Maybe you're preparing for a busy day. Maybe you're already cooking, grabbing some last minute items, or maybe you're bracing for a day all alone. Hard times, difficult times, but we're together now in this difficult season to give thanks. Share this with others. I recognize we may be limited on our time today. My heart is going out to so many of you today. It's a difficult season. So many are missing in this season, as in gone on to their reward. For me, my mom, my brothers, my family, we're still coping with the twin losses of Teresa and Dad. As much as I'd like to say we're okay, I doubt if any of us could honestly say we're there yet. And that shows up at the strangest of times. Many of you are missing people around the table today. I get it. I understand it. Some are missing in the sense that they simply they're not able to get home. A lot of restrictions placed on people today. Others are missing because of issues, events, time, circumstances. Maybe some are alienated, some bridges have been burnt. And if there's no one missing, then perhaps the season itself has caused some of us to miss our joy, such that we wonder, can we even rejoice? Can we celebrate at such a time? How do we party in a pandemic? That's the odd, discordant situation that we're facing right now. But it's not strange. Solomon said, there's a time to weep, a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn, there's a time to dance. And in these twin couplets, he linked weeping with laughing and mourning with dancing, and that they somehow go together. They're inseparable. That as surely as we go through times of weeping, there will also be times that we will experience laughing. And as surely as we endure times of mourning, there should be times of dancing. We human beings, we need both experiences. Time to process the loss, the pain, the grief, but also times to release our gain, our joy, our laughter. I'm not turning this devotion today into the familiar saw we now hear all the time, pointing out the inconsistencies of this season, that the elites can gather, the non-elites can't, and it's okay to protest, gamble, go to a liquor store, but not to worship. And I don't want to go through all that today. Across America, though, people are being told to stay home, don't get out, don't get with loved ones, don't rejoice together or be with one another. And I'm sure much of that counsel is pure, well-motivated. It's a difficult season, and I show a lot of grace to people during this season. And I appreciate the dilemmas that our authorities must face. Make sense, closer contact, one has with people, the higher the likelihood that this virus will spread. It also makes sense that in real and tangible ways, though, that we don't do well in isolation. I read a report yesterday from Scientific American, and it said that amongst teens and young adults, those who are least affected by the seriousness of this virus, their emotional and mental strain during this time has been absolutely enormous. It's off the charts. In some way, with as much safety as we can, we got to be together. We've got to see one another. We've got to encourage one another. Isolation, we pay a heavy price for that. And so I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're gathering. Sherrod and Josie and Elvira, thank you, Victor, for being a part of this. I want to focus on a seeming incongruity of partying in pandemic. In a season of loss when many, way too many, have now perished and are gone from us. When others, because of stress and strain, have simply stopped functioning. How? How can we celebrate? Would you picture the scene 400 years ago when the Pilgrims landed on our shores? While they may have experienced hardship, none expected what they faced. In the crossing, in the establishing of the colony, so much loss, so much loss. When they first got here, they were very, very joyful. They'd been at sea 65 days. But soon the joy faded because they realized they had landed at a difficult time in the late fall. They had no houses, they had no provisions. They really had no knowledge of what they faced. Of the original 102 passengers on the Mayflower, 4 died before reaching Plymouth. 46 of them died during that first winter. Only 12 of the 26 men with families survived. Only 4 of the 12 single men and boys survived that first winter. William Bradford called it the starving time. With the spring came assistance. Squanto, an indigenous man who taught the Pilgrims about the land, how to plant corn, where to fish, where to hunt, such that by the time the first year was over, they had a harvest. Their numbers were halved, but their thankfulness was doubled because those surviving said, God's been good to us. And in that setting, the first Thanksgiving took place. In English, the word thank comes from the same Latin root word as think. To thank means, I remember what you've done for me. That thankfulness is to be thankful. That gratitude comes from thoughtfulness. And that's where it's at. Where are our thoughts? If our thoughts are on the gloom and doom of the season, it's impossible to party in a pandemic. But if our thoughts remain fixated on the headlines and the obvious erosion of our passing world, it's hard to be thankful. But if our thoughts rest in God and His goodness, then a certain thankfulness begins to emerge. It was late in Paul's life. He's defending himself before King Agrippa. He's been in prison for a couple of years. In Acts 26, he uses an unusual expression, I think myself happy. That's what Paul said. I think myself happy. There's a lot of truth to that phrase. From our thought life comes either joy or despair. When you're faced with a sense of overwhelm, think on what God has done for you. And the more you think about it, you can think yourself happy. You can think yourself into thankfulness. People have learned during tough times. They may not have gone through the pandemic, but I remember a story in the Great Depression. People had to learn to find happiness in their thoughts. It was in the early 1930s. A preacher named William Stidger was at a local diner, and everybody in the restaurant was talking about the Great Depression, how bad it was, how terrible it was, how many people were without jobs, and how many people had lost their homes, and those who had committed suicide, and how many families were suffering. And one of the preachers in the bunch spoke up and said, and I'm supposed to preach a Thanksgiving sermon. What am I going to say to affirm people in the midst of depression? Several began to offer their suggestions. Then a thought hit the preacher. He said, you know what? Why don't we give thanks to the people who have blessed us and affirmed us during this time? Stidger was sitting there, and Stidger thought about it. And from his thought came to mind people for whom he was thankful in his life. A wonderful teacher Early in his life had gone out of her way to instill in him a love for literature. It affected every letter he wrote, every sermon he preached, every word he wrote. He sat down that day, that very day in the Great Depression, and wrote a letter and thanked her. A few days later, he got a reply back, and the letter was penned in that feeble scrawl of someone up in years. Can I read you a bit of that letter from that school teacher back to that preacher? She said, I can't tell you how much your note meant to me. I'm in my 80s. I live alone in a small room, cook my own meals. I'm lonely and like the last leaf of autumn lingering behind. You'll be interested to know that I taught in school for more than 50 years, and yours is the first note of appreciation I ever received. And it came on a cold blue morning, and it cheered me as nothing has in many, many years. As William Stidger read those words, he said, I'm not sentimental, but tears were flowing down my face, and it so moved me that I began to think. Remember, we think to be thankful. He said, and I thought of an old bishop in my life who had taken an interest in me as a young preacher. And he said, so I sat down and I wrote him. And 2 days later, a reply came from that old elderly preacher. He wrote, your letter, William, was so beautiful, so real, that as I sat reading it in my study, tears fell from my eyes and tears of gratitude. And before I realized what I was doing, I rose from my chair and I called my wife's name to share it with her. And I forgot that she was gone. You'll never know, William, how much your letter has warmed my spirit. I've been walking around in the glow of your letter all day long. If you are thankful, then you are thankful. Take a moment to think about the people in your life and say thanks. So many people I'd like to say thanks to, they're gone. I can't write a letter to them. Hold them in my thoughts, though. And from that thoughtfulness comes thankfulness. I wish I could talk to my dad. Our first Thanksgiving without him, can't talk to him. But Dad, I can remember what you taught me and what you put in me. From thoughtfulness comes thankfulness. All this week, and I don't really know why, but I've been walking with a memory, and it really gelled in my heart and mind this morning. A memory of someone who touched my life at a key moment, a teacher. I doubt if he would remember my name. A teacher named Charles Dyer. He would make us stand up, and everybody in our class, and we had to recite the Bill of Rights from memory, or we couldn't pass his class, wouldn't graduate. A teacher who took me and a few other guys, he took us to a courthouse. I told my wife last Sunday we were eating at James Coney Island, and I said he was the first one who took me to James Coney Island. He took me to meet with government leaders. He took me to Washington, D.C., a teacher who taught me how to love this country. I'm looking for him. I'm looking for him. I want to write him today. What about you? That's how to party in a pandemic. Don't remember the bad. Think about the good and be thankful. It's hard to imagine, but the greatest American president of all times, he's a good example of this. You know the litany of his failure. You've heard of the hurt and loss in his life, and I won't go through it, but just a few of the low points. 7 years of age, his family was forced from their home. He started to work as a child at 7 years of age. 9 years of age, his mom died. Lost his job as a store clerk when he was 20, wanted to go to law school, couldn't afford it, didn't have the education. He and a friend partnered up. They went in debt to open a store. His partner died, leaving him with all of the debt, and it took him years to repay it. After 28 years of age, at 28 years of age, after courting a girl for 4 years, he asked her to marry him. She said, no, I'm probably ministering to somebody right now. And then came his political career. Oh my, one setback after another. But at the age of 51, Abraham Lincoln was elected president of the United States. It was Lincoln who, in the heart of the Civil War, established the annual celebration of Thanksgiving on this day. Why? Lincoln knew from personal experience, you can focus on the hardship of your life, or you can focus on the goodness of God in this world. Lincoln knew, even in hard times, you'd be certain to think about what God has done and be thankful. So Debbie and Davin and Victor, we're thankful this morning. How do you party in a pandemic? There's a certain feeling of survivor's guilt when you've made it through 11 of the 12 months of this crazy year and others did not, and others are mourning today. And you don't know, is it permissible to be happy? Permissible to be grateful? I'm asking you, please party. Please. You can't study the Jewish feast without realizing something. They were part commemoration, part celebration. They commemorated, they remembered what God had done for them. But each of the required feasts was also associated with the celebration of the harvest. Passover with the barley harvest, Pentecost with the wheat harvest, Tabernacles with the grapes and olives and pomegranates and dates harvest. That they would come with their hands full and their hearts full, saying, look what God has done. That's what this season of Thanksgiving is for. To think about the wondrous things God has brought into our lives. Has God been good to you? Has he been good to you? A teacher asked a group of students to list what they thought were the 7 wonders of the world. The students cast the most votes for number 1, Egypt's Great Pyramids, 2, Taj Mahal, 3, the Grand Canyon, and 4, the Panama Canal. 5th on the students' list was the Empire State Building. St. Peter's Basilica was 6th. China's Great Wall was 7th. And while gathering up all the votes, the teacher noticed that one young lady had not yet turned in her paper. And she asked her, she said, are you having trouble making your list? And the young lady replied, yes, I am. I'm having a little trouble. I just can't make up my mind because there's so many things to choose from. The teacher said, well, why don't you stand? Tell us what you have. And maybe the class can help you sort it out. The young student hesitated, but then read aloud and said, I think the 7 wonders of the world are, number 1, to see, number 2, to hear, number 3, to touch, number 4, to taste, number 5, to feel, number 6, to laugh, and number 7, to love. If you have any of those 7 wonders, if you have many of those 7 wonders, you're living in a wondrous world. Think about it and thank God. That, my friends, is how we're going to party in the midst of a pandemic. Thank you, Lord, for all you've done in our lives. And today, we give you thanks. We enter into his gates with thankfulness. We enter into his courts with praise. And I thank God. I thank God for each of you. Thank you for the love that you share one with another. Share this with someone else. Leave a prayer request from my heart, my home, to you and yours. I wish you an incredibly blessed day. May God be with you, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Morning Devotion with Ken Gurley. Join us next time for another inspiring devotion. To support this ministry, please visit firstchurch.com/.